yeah, that movement is growing. The rest of the world is saying, why do we need a middleman if we're going to?
You're watching Silver News Daily. Subscribe for more.
Did you know that the world could soon ditch the US dollar in favor of silver? It sounds unbelievable, right? But financial experts like Mario Innecco are starting to see a massive shift happening right before our eyes. Countries are stocking up on silver, while the dollar's grip on global trade is weakening. Stick around as we break down why silver could soon become the currency of choice for nations worldwide, and why this shift might happen sooner than you think. To understand why the world is moving away from the US dollar, we need to look at the actions of the Federal Reserve. Over the past year, the Fed has been aggressively cutting interest rates. Most recently, a 50 basis point cut is on the table. While this might seem like a strategy to boost the economy, it's actually weakening the value of the dollar. As rates drop, investors see less reason to hold onto US dollars because they offer lower returns, pushing them to look for safer alternatives. Now here's the critical part. As the dollar loses value, it increases inflationary pressure. Everything priced in dollars, from basic goods to global commodities, becomes more expensive, leading to growing uncertainty and instability. This is where silver comes in. Unlike the dollar, silver isn't subject to these policy decisions. It holds intrinsic value, something that becomes especially important when fiat currencies, like the dollar, start losing their purchasing power. Silver's appeal is growing not just among investors, but also nations. They're looking for alternatives that can offer long-term security, and silver is beginning to shine brighter because it's immune to central bank manipulation and government debt. As the dollar's dominance declines, the demand for silver is skyrocketing.
I mean, Turkey, I guess they want to. It's a country that is partly in Europe, even though it's a small part, and most of it in Asia. So they want both feet. You know, they try to play both sides. But the other reason why Turkey, I think, is applying for BRICS is that they never had any luck applying to be a part of the European Union. Europeans never really were too keen on having them. And yes, the fact that they're part of NATO is a huge thing as well. I think after the US, they've got the biggest armed forces in NATO. Turkey. And like you said, in the beginning of the year, I think it was 6 or 7 countries that actually joined BRICS. Saudi Arabia, they're supposed to have joined, and I think they have, but they're not really publicizing it. And there's going to be 47, I think, guest countries going to the BRICS summit in October. And recently, I think there was an IMF meeting run by Russia in Moscow, and like 140 countries attended. So yeah, it's huge, and I think it's still underestimated by the West, the mainstream in the West, by Wall Street, by the City of London. They still kind of. What the view they have is that, well, they'll never challenge us, but I think they're wrong. And I'm not saying this because I'm pro BRICS, but just because it's going to affect us here in the UK and the US, because as I've said many times, what it will mean is that these countries are going to need our currencies a lot less. And that means they're not going to really be buying as much of our currencies or investing as much in our currencies. So they're going to become worth less and less. And that's just going to hurt, aside from all the debts and borrowing that we're doing in the West and deficit spending. That's also going to hurt the purchasing power of our currencies. And, and that's why gold keeps going higher and higher versus all currencies, even the BRICS currencies, but it's going to particularly hurt us in the West.
As the US dollar weakens, silver is gaining traction as a powerful safe haven asset. For decades, gold has been seen as the go-to for investors during times of economic uncertainty. But silver offers a unique advantage. It's both a precious metal and an industrial commodity. This dual role means that while silver benefits from being a store of value, It also plays a crucial part in various industries, especially renewable energy, electronics, and automotive sectors. Think about this: as the world shifts toward clean energy solutions, silver is becoming essential for manufacturing solar panels. In fact, it's a key component in the photovoltaic cells that convert sunlight into electricity. This surge in demand is not only driving up silver prices, but also positioning it as a critical asset for the future of global energy. Unlike the dollar, which relies heavily on financial markets and central bank policies, silver's value is deeply rooted in its physical real-world utility. As global demand for renewable energy grows, so does the demand for silver. It's no longer just a hedge against inflation or economic instability. It's becoming a foundational resource for the future. And this shift is making silver even more attractive to nations looking for long-term financial and industrial security.
From today until 30 days forward, so in the next month. And yeah, I think they multiplied the amount of gold they're going to buy from like from like 10 million dollars to 92 million dollars a day, and it adds up to about 30 tons for a month. So it's quite significant. And the timing and the announcement is interesting because you usually don't announce that kind of stuff. So maybe they're giving a kind of signal to the other BRICS nations and other nations that are looking to attend the BRICS summit on October 22nd to 24th, that the way forward in the BRICS monetary, let's say, system is to have some gold. I'm not saying they're going to use gold to trade, but they could use gold as a reserve instead of the dollar. And I think a lot of these countries, they are not completely abandoning the dollar because maybe if they're doing business like China is still doing business with the US and other countries, if they have to buy stuff from the US, they'll have to use dollars. The only country that seems to not be in that situation right now is Russia because of all the sanctions. But like you said, I think yeah, that movement is growing. The rest of the world is saying, why do we need a middleman if we're going to deal amongst each other? Why do we need the dollar?
Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Specifically, how entire nations are moving away from the US dollar and turning toward alternatives like silver. One of the biggest drivers behind this shift is the geopolitical tension between the US and major economic powers like Russia and China. Over the past few years, these countries, along with other BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been actively reducing their reliance on the dollar in international trade. Instead, they are seeking to diversify their reserves and trade in other currencies, or even commodities like gold and silver. Russia, in particular, has been stockpiling vast amounts of precious metals, and China is doing the same. Why? Because they recognize that the dollar's dominance is no longer a guarantee. The economic sanctions placed on Russia, for instance, have made it harder for them to access dollars, pushing them to seek alternatives. Silver, along with gold, has become a strategic asset for these nations, as it's not controlled by any one country and offers protection against economic sanctions and currency manipulation. This move away from the dollar isn't just happening in isolated cases. It's a broader trend. Countries are rethinking their dependence on a currency that can be weaponized in geopolitical conflicts. By turning to silver, they are not only safeguarding their economies, but also challenging the global dominance of the dollar. And as more countries join the BRICS movement, this trend is set to accelerate.
I think the biggest way it's going to affect us is that the BRICS countries that already are in place, 10 or 11, they control a lot of commodities, hard assets, energy, and the other countries that want to join the same. They're mostly in Asia and Africa. And what that means is that it's not going to be as easy for the West to control commodities and commodities prices. and we're going to have to pay more for it. I think it's the ex-guy from Credit Suisse. I forgot his name. He's got a Hungarian name, but he said that there's like a war now for commodities, and BRICS are they're gonna control the commodities and hard assets. So unless the U.S. And the West, let's say Europe, allow their economies to develop and to exploit for commodities, which is something that doesn't look like they want to do with this Green New Deal and green agenda. And they seem to not want to allow for extraction of minerals. Things are going to get a lot worse, I think. And the other thing is if our currencies are not, let's say if countries around the world don't buy as many treasuries or as many gilts in the UK or European government bonds, that means that unless the central banks start QE and buying these bonds, interest rates are going to be higher than they normally would have been, and that's going to hurt our economies. And I know interest rates have been going down, but I think they probably would have gone down even more if we weren't having so much trouble in the world with sanctions, with BRICS. Because if we're cooperating with the rest of the world, they wouldn't have a reason to start a BRICS block or anything. They'd be cooperating with us. So that's why it will hurt us, in my opinion. And it looks like, we forget that the West is a small part of the world population and the resources now, and their economies are growing faster and faster, and they have better demographics than we do.
Another major factor driving the move towards silver is global inflation, which is putting tremendous pressure on economies, particularly in the West. With inflation hitting multi-decade highs in the US and Europe, many investors and even governments are turning to tangible assets like silver to preserve wealth. The dollar, once considered a safe store of value, is losing its appeal as rising inflation eats away at its purchasing power. In contrast, silver is inflation resistant. It doesn't lose value in the same way fiat currencies do because it isn't tied to the performance of the single economy or subject to manipulation by central banks. And it's not just financial markets that are waking up to this reality. Nations facing inflationary spirals are increasingly investing in silver as a hedge against devaluing currencies. At the same time, geopolitical instability is contributing to global inflation. The war in Ukraine, ongoing sanctions, and supply chain disruptions are all driving up the cost of essential commodities. These rising prices are creating further uncertainty about the long-term stability of the dollar. And while gold has traditionally been seen as a safe haven during inflationary periods, silver's increasing role in industrial applications and its affordability make it the more practical option for many nations and investors looking to safeguard their wealth. So, in a world where inflation is on the rise and the dollar is losing strength, silver stands out as a strong, stable alternative.
I'm all for freedom and and free markets and freedom of the individual, but it's something that has been chipped away at in the West. Actually, you've seen what's happened here in the UK with the riots and how they've cracked down on what they call far right thugs, even though they're just people who are most of them were just protesting about policies. And in the US as well, we're seeing that we saw recently, is it Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, admitting that the Biden administration asked the company to censor people. So, and I think the BRICS nations, we are told in the West that they're authoritarian. They don't have strong democratic principles. But we've been in the West for the last 25, 30 years interfering and trying to bring democracy to these countries. And all we have done is destabilize it. And I think these countries, they think we are hypocritical, and I can understand why they say that. You just have to look at what happened in Iraq in '03. We went in there and they, based on a lie, really, about the weapons of mass destruction. And then we destabilized other countries like Libya. And there's so many of them, Panama as well. The U.S. has been interfering as well in elections since the '50s. So I think these people are saying, yes, uh, we might not have the same institutions as you, but you have to respect us. And even if I don't agree with the way China's run, I think they run their own house. And I think that's what, and I think these countries have strengthened economically so much in the last 20 years that now they have the wherewithal to stand up to the West. And I'm not taking sides here. I'm just telling you how I see it.
Silver's rise isn't just about inflation or geopolitical tensions. There's also a growing trend in financial markets that signals a shift toward this precious metal. Let's look at the data. According to the CME FedWatch tool, the increasing likelihood of aggressive rate cuts by the Federal Reserve is one of the main factors driving silver prices higher. As interest rates fall, the dollar weakens and investors start looking for safer, more stable investments. Enter silver. We're already seeing silver prices pushing toward $31 an ounce, with resistance levels not far off at $31.10 and beyond. If the Fed follows through with a jumbo rate cut, silver could easily break through these levels and surge even higher. This momentum isn't just limited to short-term gains, though. Investors see silver as a long-term play, especially as uncertainty around the dollar continues to grow. The fact that silver is denominated in dollars makes it cheaper for international buyers when the dollar weakens, further driving up global demand. But here's a question to think about. Could we be witnessing the start of a long-term shift where silver overtakes the dollar as the go-to reserve asset? It may seem far-fetched, but the trends in both currency and commodity markets are making this scenario more plausible every day. What do you think? Is silver poised to become the new standard for value? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
Well, you have to be careful, I guess, now online what you say. But I try to stay away a little bit from the politics, and I try to focus on precious metals. And some people might say, "Oh, all you think about is money," but it's not true. It's just that precious metals and having savings, because that's what it is, protects you in times of crisis. And I think things are going to get chaotic in the West, and the trick will be to hold on to your gold and silver through the crisis, and see what happens after the dust settles. I just saw a post today by a guy that I follow, a Chinese guy from Hong Kong, and he was saying that his grandfather was a banker during before the China became communist in the Republic of China in Shanghai. And the nationalist government at the time, before 1949, they in 1948 actually they confiscated a lot of all the people's gold, but his grandfather was able to hide the gold for him and his clients, and eventually, yeah, they were able to move to Hong Kong and start again and thrive. But so that's what it means. It means you might have to move, but if you have your gold, you can go anywhere, and that's how it keeps you free. I think personally, I think it's really hard to try to fight the powers that be on an individual basis. And yeah, you have to basically fight for your self-reliance and sovereignty. That's the way I see it.
So, where does this all lead? With inflation soaring, the Federal Reserve making drastic rate cuts, and geopolitical tensions driving nations away from the dollar, Silver is stepping into a spotlight it hasn't occupied in years. The world is waking up to the reality that relying on a single currency, especially one that is vulnerable to policy changes and political pressures, might no longer be a viable option. Mario Innecco, along with other financial experts, believes that silver could soon play a much larger role in the global economy. Its stability, utility in key industries, and immunity from central bank manipulation make it a strong contender for nations and investors looking for long-term security. As countries like Russia and China accumulate precious metals and reduce their dollar reserves, the global financial landscape is slowly but surely shifting. The bottom line? Silver's rise isn't just a short-term trend. It's part of a broader movement away from the US dollar. And if this shift continues, silver could very well become a preferred store of value, maybe even a global currency alternative. The question isn't if this change will happen, but when. So is now the time to start considering silver for your financial future? It might be, but remember, this is not financial advice, just something worth thinking about as the dollar's dominance continues to fade.